Order, order. Anne Davies to move the motion.
Diolch yn fawr. I beg to move that this House has considered the impact of changes to agricultural property relief. And Mr Stringer, it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Before I start, can I please refer members to my register of interest as well as a tenant dairy farmer. 80% of our land is given over to farming in Wales, and our food foundation sector, businesses that produce, process, manufacture and wholesale food and drink goods, is a vital part of our economy, hitting a turnover of £9.3 billion in 2023. In fact, the Labour Welsh Government Cabinet Ministers have lauded Wales as a food nation. But UK Government autumn budget decisions to change the agricultural property relief and business property relief will have a real effect on food, sustainable food production and food security in Wales. Business property relief and agricultural property relief were introduced in the 1970s and 80s respectively to ensure that a farm or family business could continue trading after the owner's death, protecting it from being sold and broken up. But on the 30th of October 2024, the Chancellor of the Exchequer announced that the Labour UK Government intends to change APR and BPR conditions from the 6th of April 26. From that date, 100% relief from inheritance tax will be restricted to the first £1 million of combined agricultural and business property, and 50% thereafter. The proposals equate to landowners paying inheritance tax at a rate of 20% of estate value, with a threshold from which they will pay dependent on individual circumstances. This tax is payable in instalments over 10 years without interest. Combining APR and BPR under these changes means that the asset value of the tools and machinery necessary to operate a farming business are affected, as well as the agricultural land and property, alongside any diversification activities which the UK Government has itself told farmers to explore to increase their income. The UK Government contends that these changes will impact around 500 estates per year and that small family farms won't be affected. But organisations within the agricultural sector say otherwise. The National Farmers Union has calculated 75% of commercial family farms will fall above the £1 million threshold across the UK. The Farming Union of Wales has other figures, has estimated that essentially all farms that produce nearly 90% of agricultural output in Wales could be liable under these changes. And in fact, Arian Humphreys of LHP Accountants, which is a large accountancy firm across South and West Wales, has told me that of the 51 farming clients that have inquired so far about these changes, 46 will have to pay inheritance tax if they die after the 6th of April 26, which is around 90%. So, by all means.
The Honourable Lady for giving way, and indeed congratulate her on bringing this matter before the House again. On the subject of the 500 estates, can we all agree that that only relates to the number of estates that claim under APR? It doesn't take account of the effect of APR and BPR together, and that in fact for the purposes of BPR valuations, these valuations are taken at book value, not market value, so inevitably there must be a massive number more estates that are going to be liable than the 500.
Absolutely. I thank the honourable gentleman. Absolutely. We all know that this is the case. And I... Sorry? Of course.
The Minister from his position is shaking his head. I wonder if she would join me in inviting him to intervene to explain why that fact is wrong.
I don't know if the Minister would like to do so now, or we'll wait until the end. It's up to the Minister.
Carry on with your contribution,
I will
please.
at some length explain why the remarks you've just made. Yeah. I will explain at some length why the remarks the gentleman...
Order. If people wish to make an intervention, if they can stand and make an intervention, it's up to the person who's speaking whether or not they accept the intervention. I was going to make this point at the end of Anne Davis's speech. This debate is oversubscribed, and I will be putting a time limit on. So if people could be short with their interventions, because interventions will mean less time for those people who've put in to speak. Anne Davis.
Thank you, Chair. Of the 5 clients that Adrian has mentioned, 5 of these have, well, the reasons that they won't come under the tax liability is that some are very small farms with off-farm income, and others have transferred their farms following ill health, or they have significant debt which offsets the value of their farms. It is clear that assessments to the impact of these changes on working farms across the UK and on the wider economy and the wider food supply chain are inadequate. And the data we do have is deficient. It includes small holdings and non-working farms, and data based on the basic payment scheme or on agricultural output would provide a fairer representation of the situation for genuine farmers. By all means.
She's speaking remarkably well about the challenges that this policy by the government is going to put on farmers in Wales and Scotland and across the UK. But can I also just highlight some research the Scottish Land and Estates have done, which shows that the average UK farm size is 217 acres, average GB agricultural land value is £8,200 per acre, which shows the average farm in the UK, working farm, is about £1.8 million. So does that just not show the flaw in the government's argument? This is not attacking the richest landowners, it's attacking working farms the length and breadth of the UK.
Anne Davis.
I thank the gentleman for his intervention, and I totally agree, and I'll come on to further details on that later on in my speech. But it is also clear that such organisation, industry experts, were not consulted on the changes prior to the announcement, which could have led to a fairer, more appropriate solution that is not detrimental to family farms or the wider industry. The lack of... By all means.
I'm very grateful to the honourable member for giving way. She's making a very passionate speech on an extremely important topic. She'll know that my constituency of Chester South and Eddisbury borders Wales, and there are many family farms in North Wales who are deeply concerned about the consequences of this policy. Does she agree with me that this policy will not only impact farmers, but also the wider agricultural industrial community, including businesses in my constituency that work alongside Welsh farmers in North Wales, such as Meadow Foods in Chester?
Anne Davis.
Absolutely. Perhaps I should mention that Meadow Foods is the company that takes the milk from our farm, actually. So there you are. We're that close to one another. But totally agree. And I'll come on to that again as I move through. The lack of any data on the particular effects of these changes in Wales is a really genuine problem. The available data, especially those used by the Treasury, is a combination of Wales and England or UK-level data. It is not Welsh data. And this is why organisations in Wales are having to make up their own calculations on the impact in Wales. The CLA has calculated that an average 250-acre dairy farm in Wales could be hit by £119,000 inheritance tax charge, and the average 250-acre livestock farm is expecting an £85,000 charge. But these figures do not include the asset value of diversified enterprise, meaning, of course, that it could be higher still. It is crucial that we in Wales, not only farmers, but policymakers and other stakeholders, have accurate data to understand the real impacts of these changes within the specific context of Wales. The FUW, which is the Farmers' Union of Wales, has called that the Wales-specific impact assessment to be modelled with working farms only, as the Welsh Government, the Welsh Labour Government, did during the 2023 Sustainable Farming Scheme analysis. Today, I reiterate the call for the Government to implement that assessment, as I and my Plaid Cymru colleagues have continuously done so since October. The arguments have not changed. And there is evidence that these changes won't even make an iota of a difference to the Treasury. In fact, modelling from the CBI Economics has found that the changes to BPR will actually cost the Exchequer £1.25 billion between 26-27 and 29-30. And it is unclear how they work towards Labour's mission of growth, as industry organisations have come across numerous cases of farms and businesses delaying investments, putting orders on hold and preparing to reduce staffing. And don't forget, friends, that for each pound a farmer spends, it generates another £9 within that community. And what other rural industry does that? Undermining local farmers and agricultural producers risks missing out on crucial opportunity to shorten our supply chains and improve our food resilience. We currently produce 60% of food that we need here in the UK, and when our food imports already outnumber exports by £33.2 billion, causing a reduction in food we produce will only increase our vulnerability to factors outside our control, the damaging consequences of which we have already felt in the energy market. And there is also a consensus that these changes do not address the initial concerns of non-farmers investing in land to avoid inheritance tax. For those with new money, made through capital gains, made in the non-agricultural economy, there will continue to be a huge incentive to buy agricultural land, given that the value of that land above the announced threshold will be charged at half the rate on inheritance tax in comparison to other assets. Of course.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady for giving way. She's making an excellent speech. I wonder if she would agree with me that had the Treasury considered increasing the threshold and raising the overall rate for those very, very wealthy landowners to 40%, they might have actually achieved the outcome they were looking for, although I would put on the record I wouldn't have gone down the route that they have anyway.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm coming on to solutions in a minute, and I very hope that the Minister will be listening to my options here. Extending the existing scope of APR to land managed under environmental agreement with, say, on behalf of government or public bodies, also suggests that foundations and large companies could buy up land and sell on to pay inheritance tax without it being subject in the same way. And by that I mean we have a train, actually, of people in West Wales who are already buying land for planting trees, for carbon offsetting, for solar farms and for wind farms. Absolutely. Oh, sorry, I'll come to you in a minute.
I thank the Honourable Lady for giving way. I find the notion of people buying and selling land purely for fiscal purposes abhorrent. I come from a farming family. My father was broke. He had to sell most of the land. There's not a day that goes by I don't look at the fields and regret that my family parted with it. So what point I want to make is that there's an emotional attachment between the farming family and the land, and that is quite different to buying or selling a house, shares or a holiday home in Spain. Quite different.
And Davis?
Thank you. Absolutely. And as somebody who has lived and has worked the land all my life, I totally agree with what you're saying. It's something that's within your soul. It's not something that it's just a trading issue. Sorry, do you want to come in as well, and then I'll carry on. I'll make progress.
I thank the Honourable Lady for giving way and commend her on her excellent speech. Does the Honourable Lady agree with me that at the very time when we're asking farmers to be even more active participants in helping us to mitigate climate change and restore nature, when they're already under so much emotional, financial pressure, it's the last time that we should be adding to their stresses and risking the loss of that deep knowledge of the land that could be passed from generation to generation?
And Davis?
Thank you. Absolutely, and I totally agree. There is nobody that understands those fields better than the farmer himself or herself. You've worked that land, you know where those wet corners are, you know where you don't need to tread during that time. And absolutely, and the SFS, of course, which is the Sustainable Farming Scheme, which is coming out in Wales next year, is part of nature restoration. So, yes, absolutely. I'm not sure where I finished there. And extending the existing scope, no, I've done that bit. And West Wales estate agents are understood to be already seeing increased investor interest in purchasing farms following the autumn budget. And selling land to pay inheritance tax bill will inevitably hit tenant farmers, as the £1 million threshold will hit asset-rich estates. Around 30% of land in Wales is farmed under some sort of tenancy agreements, and while some are local authority owned, many are private landlords. The Tenant Farmers Association anticipates that more insecure agricultural tenancies will be terminated to allow land to be sold to avoid taxes on death, and other landlords are reducing lengths of term offered to tenants who are expecting longer leases, so that those farms are more readily sellable in the case of tax change.
On that point, tenant farmers are expected to be impacted as landowners on Ynys Môn will have no option except to sell their farms to cover the additional APR costs. These landowners have a good relationship with their tenants, but they are faced with no choice but to sell, leaving generational farmers to lose their home, their businesses and their future, with long-lasting effects on the rural community. Does my honourable friend agree with me that the realities of agriculture in Wales, like that of tenant farmers, must be fully considered by the UK Government as a part of a Wales-specific impact assessment?
Yeah. And Davis?
Diolch yn fawr, yes, absolutely. And I agree with my honourable friend that actually, and I'll add that the wider economy will lose another vital source of food production. You know, you take that land back, you will never have it back into food production. And as my honourable friend mentioned, in Wales there is also a knock-on effect on the Welsh language. 43% of those involved in agriculture speak Welsh. And keeping our farming communities alive is key to moving towards the Labour Welsh Government's target of achieving 1 million Welsh speakers in 2050. And this is a real worry. And farming constituents have told me that they are concerned about the impacts these changes will have on future food production in Wales by Welsh-speaking families in areas already facing depopulation, with an eye on what that means for their own children. The families behind these farming businesses are really important in this debate. They are not just figures, they are people and families. People like Richard Toos of Mine Here, who runs a 700-acre farm of 400 Holstein dairy cows and 300 pedigree llyn ewes, with his parents, brother and children. APR and BPR changes have blown apart their succession plans. They now may be forced to transfer their parents' share in their farm and hope that they live for another 7 years, or will have to face a big tax burden on top of their business debt. And yesterday, just yesterday, I heard that Richard's father had passed away suddenly over Christmas, to add to their family worries and concerns. For me, the APR and BPR changes don't appear proportionate in many ways. Inflation has already eroded the nil-rate tax band of $325,000, frozen since 2009 and set to remain frozen till 2030. When APR and BPR were introduced, the nil-rate band covered 56 acres of farmland. Today, it covers 29 acres. And how do the changes apply? And how the changes apply isn't fair. Whether particularities of who shares that farm with you, or which tools and machinery you own or have hired, or how much business debt there is, has a direct impact on your inheritance tax. And while the government has said that married couples and their descendants can benefit up to £3 million in tax relief, the reality is that tax experts are quoting figures varying between 2 and 4 million based on different scenarios. And we must remember that the Chancellor stated in October that the starting line for calculations is £1 million. And there... Oh, by all means.
Diolch yn fawr. Thank you to the Honourable Member for giving way. Farmers in my constituency say to me that the threshold is the problem here, that the on-paper value of the farm, often several million, even if the farmers are making no actual surplus income from the farm, it would take them well into this being caught by this policy. But at the same time, we have a situation where non-farmers bought up more than half the farms and estates sold on the open market in England in 2023. So the current situation isn't working either. Indeed, one local farmer told me that a 350-acre farm in Suffolk was bought by a merchant banker from London who hadn't even seen the farm, clearly not intent on farming. So would the Honourable Member agree that we do need the government to increase the threshold, but also those arguing for the status quo are not doing farmers justice either?
No. Absolutely. Thank you. Absolutely. I'm coming to my solutions. So I hope the Treasury is going to listen to these now. I have got 3 solutions which I think would work. There are alternatives to this policy. The first one is abolishing capital business asset rollover relief. Could have provided a more targeted measure to tackle wealthy individuals buying agricultural land to avoid tax. That's the big one. The second one, taxing assets at the point of selling rather than at the point of passing to another generation would be a fairer measure to keep family farms. And the third, if we can modify existing proposals, we could double the zero rate band, significantly increase the threshold while allowing shorter periods than the 7 years for potentially exempt transfers. And can I make an additional comment on that, really? Do any of us here have the right to live for 7 years? That, my friends, is really not within our gift. And these are only a few solutions from expert organisations within the sector. And of course, these organisations, these experts, could have proposed these solutions before the government made its decision, underlying again the importance of proper consultation with stakeholders. And I'll just sum up here, if that's okay. The APR and BPR changes have come at an already difficult time for farmers, with high costs of production, adverse weather and marketplace volatility taking its toll. And working farms that have been at the heart of Welsh communities for generations will suffer. As a constituent told me, every farmer deserves the right of the security of the farm they own or rent. Farms are not businesses, they are family legacies, vital for our rural economy and key to preserving our Welsh-speaking culture. Plaid Cymru supports closing loopholes that allow billionaire landowners to avoid paying their fair share, but this one-size-fits-all approach ignores the unique challenges of Welsh farming. And that's why it's so important that the UK Government implements a Wales-specific impact assessment that reflects the realities of agriculture in Wales. A petition calling for the UK Government not to change inheritance tax relief for working farms has reached over 146,000 signatories and is being debated here on the 10th of February. So put that in your diary, folks. It's clear that the public agree. It's time for the government to listen to farmers, to conduct a proper analysis and rethink this damaging policy before it's too late. Thank you, Chair.
Can I remind honourable members that they should bob if they wish to be called in the debate. The debate is well subscribed, so I'm going to start with a 4-minute limit. And if there are a lot of interventions, that time limit will have to be reduced. The question is that this House has considered the impact of changes to agricultural property relief. Steve Witherden.
It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, Mr Stringer. I congratulate the Right Honourable Member for Caerphilly for securing this important debate, which is a major concern for many of my constituents in Montgomeryshire and Glyndŵr. Farming is at the heart of Wales' social fabric, playing a vital role in our economy, food security and our stewardship of the beautiful Welsh countryside. On Saturday, I met with representatives from the FUW in Llansilin and NFU Cymru at a farm in Llanerfel to discuss the ongoing challenges that farmers are facing. Farming is currently the least profitable sector of our economy, and changes to APR are having a significant impact on family-run farms. A lifelong farmer in my constituency raised her children on her 220-acre farm. Although considered small, the farm is valued at over £1 million. Her 48-year-old son, who has farmed alongside her since the age of 18, had hoped to take over the farm His young daughters now share his passion. Sadly, they now face the prospect of losing the farm they have worked so hard for. Now, let me be clear. I support progressive taxation to ensure that the wealthiest pay their fair share towards the upkeep of our society. In the 21st century, we see individual plutocrats and super-wealthy multinationals buying up agricultural land to avoid paying inheritance tax, with no intention of using it for farming. This reduces our farmed land, which we can ill afford when we have a fast-growing population in an unstable world. The proposed changes to APR for farmers come on the back of this and more, and feel like the straw that broke the camel's back. Or as we would say in Wales, i'r hoelan olaf yn i'r ach, if the honourable member for Caerfyrddin can forgive my North East Wales accent. These changes to APR risk having a deeply detrimental effect on working family farms. And what's at stake here? Food security. I have repeatedly spoken in the Chamber about my heartbreaking experiences with hungry children and food banks. In recent years, we have seen something many never thought they'd witness: food scarcity, empty shelves in the supermarkets, and astronomical food price inflation. Mr. Stringer, it cannot be understated how that period of food inflation affected the poorest in our country. I won't say more about the proposed APR policy as a whole. Prior to my election in July, I attended 10 hustings. 10 hustings. We do like our hustings in Mid Wales, and my thoughts on this topic are well known and are on the record. However, I will speak about mitigations. Firstly, can I respectfully request that the Minister considers raising the threshold? If this policy is to target those who buy farmland solely to dodge inheritance tax, then let's make it so. Raise the threshold and actually increase the rate for people like that, so that no family farm is affected. Secondly, can I respectfully request, can I implore the Minister to look at an exemption for farmers who, at the risk of sounding macabre, but to make myself clear, are too late in life to plan for this proposed change. I hope the Minister and the Chair can forgive my emotion when you sit with an elderly farmer and his wife, and with both fighting back the tears, they tell you, if only I could die now, if only there was some kind of pill I could take now so that my children won't have to worry about this. It does have a really profound effect on you. Diolch.
Seamus Logan.
Thank you, Chair. It's a pleasure to serve with you. And thank the member for Caerfyrddin, or it's not right, I'm not sure, for bringing this important debate. And I agree with her about the emotional attachment, and also the member for Caithness, Sutherland and Easter Ross drew attention to this as well. I urge you to watch The Field with Richard Harris, his Oscar-winning performance. In my contribution today, I want to return to the point that I've made in previous debates. Since it's already been made by the Honourable Member, the key issue here is that food security is national security. We as MPs have a duty to ensure that, and to make sure that we deliver jobs for communities across the country and low prices for consumers. Yet, the government behaves as if it thinks that the food appears magically on the shelves in supermarkets. My constituency, Aberdeenshire North Moray East, holds some of the best agricultural farmland in the country, and it will be disproportionately impacted by this change. 3/4 of the land in my constituency is used for agriculture, and the people who work this land are incredibly worried. Personally, I would have sympathy with a policy that would target wealthy individuals that purchase agricultural land as a means of avoiding inheritance tax. That will not be the sole consequence of this legislation. That is the crucial point. After the Chancellor delivered her budget speech last year, the NFU and the NFUS immediately cast doubt on the revenue that the policy would actually raise. They were ignored and dismissed. Now even the OBR, which Labour appear quick to mention and then ignore when it suits them, the OBR has cast doubt on the revenue this policy would raise. They state that the Treasury figure of 500 million is now highly uncertain. The justification for this policy is falling apart. Since we last met on this issue, almost every major supermarket chain in the UK has publicly backed farmers, urging the government to halt its plans and to carry out a consultation. Ashwin Prasad, Tesco's chief commercial officer, said that there must be a pause in the government's implementation of the budget measures while the full consultation is carried out. Farmers recognise Labour's APR change as a bad decision. Now the UK's leading supermarkets have confirmed this. We must not forget that Labour brought in this change after explicitly ruling it out. When it comes to planning for the future of family farms, long-term clarity is needed, and the UK government have failed farmers on this point. Nevertheless, listening to NFUS and the NFU on this issue would have saved a lot of heart for farmers, rural communities and shoppers across the country. I've heard time and time again from this government that this policy was necessary to tackle the difficult financial situation that they inherited from the previous government. I do not see how a bad inheritance justifies an objectively bad policy for consumers and farmers. If this necessity was so, why is the Chancellor rushing to Davos to offer tax release to non-DOMs? Why is she not tackling widespread tax evasion by prominent individuals, as reported recently by the BBC? And why is she not considering a wealth tax? It seems ironic that the Labour government complains about their dire inheritance while ignoring the dire inheritance they are inflicting on family farms throughout the UK. It's not too late for the UK government to reassess this damaging policy and make the necessary changes to protect farmers across these islands and in my constituency. It's a bad policy, Minister, and it's time to rethink it.
Rupert Lowe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I congratulate the honourable member for securing such a very valuable debate today. Being a farmer is not a job, it's a career. It's not a career, it's a way of life. As one of the few active farming MPs, I am more qualified than most to comment. We were told that Labour had no intention of changing APR before the election. Farmers would have voted for Labour, specifically on that pledge from the Environment Secretary. They certainly wouldn't now. We should call it what it is, an outright betrayal. Where do you all think your food comes from? It doesn't grow on shelves in Waitrose. It's grown by British farmers on British farms. I urge all MPs, speak to your farming constituents. They will all say exactly the same. The backbone of British farming is being intentionally broken. If Labour continues down this path, thousands of grieving British farming families will lose their farms forever. Is that really what the government wants? The answer seems to be yes. This assault on British family farms will undermine our food security, making our already uncertain place in an increasingly dangerous world even more precarious. Supporting British farmers today means safeguarding our domestic food supply for tomorrow. That should be the aim of any responsible government. A rethink of this policy is urgently required. Thank you.
Charlie Dewhurst.
Thank you, Chair. Now it's starting to feel a bit like Groundhog Day, because the government clearly isn't listening to the entire agricultural economy, community and experts. So let's go back to the beginning. Let's have a brief history lesson. The Honourable Member for Great Yarmouth just mentioned that the government said prior to the election they had no intention to change APR. And at the budget, the Chancellor told us this was a measure to prevent very wealthy individuals from buying up agricultural land to avoid inheritance tax. Then there was a pivot because that was proved to be untrue in the analysis of the policy. So we were told this is about revenue raising for public services in rural areas. But then the OBR said, well, actually, it's not going to raise the revenue it says it's going to raise. So the whole thing has unravelled week after week. We've heard from other honourable members today about the issues around the APR analysis, not taking into account the BPR effect and what that does for tenant farmers and for farmers who have used BPR as one vehicle to wrap everything into in the event of a death. So we have farmers, agricultural organisations, supermarkets, tax experts, even the Observer this weekend coming out against this policy. So it's truly remarkable the government has managed to unite all of those people against one single measure. Now today, quite significantly, we had analysis from the Agriculture and Horticultural Development Board. Now, this is important because the HDB is a non-departmental government body, not a lobbying organisation. Now, their analysis using data from DEFRA, the Farm Business Survey and the Scottish Government says that over 75% of farms will be affected by this. 3 times the amount the flawed Treasury modelling said. And these farms, most of them simply cannot afford a large inheritance tax bill because, as we all know, they do not have the income to pay it. So the result, therefore, will be the sale of land upon death, most likely to the wealthy individuals or businesses this very policy allegedly originally was meant to deter. And this, in turn, will take land out of production, risking both our food security and local agricultural economies. And that's a really important point, as was made by my honourable friend, the member for Chester South and Edinburgh. What impact is there on the construction firms, the feed merchants, the hauliers, the plumbers, the electricians, all of those who rely on a healthy farming sector? But the government has ploughed on, head in the sand. And at what cost? Well, there's a political cost, the decimation of Labour's reputation in the countryside, but more importantly, the human cost. The enormous stress this has placed on family farms, the stories of suicide that are frankly simply unforgivable. Now, if the Chancellor can look again at non-DOMs, she can look at this again. And if the Treasury is seeking to deter the wealthy from buying agricultural land, then let's look at this again. If you're seeking to raise revenue, let's look at this again. Because the farmers are not going to back down, we are not going to back down. So let's do the right thing, get round the table and find a better way forward.
Yeah. Carla Lockhart.
Chairman, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and can I commend the Honourable Lady for bringing forward this debate. She's a real advocate for the farmer, and I believe her constituents today will have noted that. Farming, as it has been said, is not just a job, it's a way of life. It's a generational commitment, and in rural Northern Ireland, within my constituency of Upper Bann, despite the recent inclement weather, rising production costs and the very real concerns of avian bird flu, blue tongue and the affliction of TB, our farmers continue to toil away. As we stand here today, they're milking cows, they're feeding livestock, they're working the land and ultimately feeding the nation. Farmers take great pride in their work, 0 days off, low incomes, and bear the immense responsibility of being the custodians of our countryside and the very lifeblood of our rural communities. Schools, businesses and essential services depend on them. I will indeed.
And I sincerely hope I'm wrong in what I'm about to suggest. But if the value of land was to drop as a result of these measures, and where a farm is heavily borrowed, owing the bank a lot, it could be the case that a bank would foreclose and force the sale of a farm.
Carla Lockhart.
The honourable member is not wrong. He is rarely wrong. Absolutely, that is the that is the concern. That is the concern for many farming families across Northern Ireland, across this United Kingdom. The way that this could see the split of their family farm. As we stand here, agriculture has long been and continues to be the backbone of the UK economy. The agri-food sector contributes significantly to our GDP each year and employs hundreds of thousands of people across the country. Yet, despite their crucial contribution, farmers face ever-increasing pressures not of their making. Farming is deeply personal for me. I was raised on a farm. I'm the daughter of a farmer, the wife of a farmer, and as I've said before in this place, I'm the proud mum of a little boy who aspires to be a family farmer. He also dreams of being a professional footballer, but we'll talk about that another day. So when I speak of farming, it really cuts deep, and it's from my heart. Today I bring a simple but urgent message to the government. Continue down this current path at your peril. The proposed tax changes are a heavy blow to those who are already struggling and will be a wrecking ball to our rural communities and rural way of life across this United Kingdom. It will undermine our food security, drive up prices and undermine the world-class environmental standards and that British farmers adhere to day and daily. The changes to agriculture property relief and business property relief flies in the face of the manifesto commitments of this government. The Prime Minister, in comments prior to the election, told farmers what they wanted to hear, and it feels very much, as we would say in Northern Ireland, you've threw them under the bus. And that has been demonstrated for very little monetary return for the government coffers. The words "losing a farm is not like losing any other business. It can't come back. You deserve better," came from the Prime Minister's mouth. Words that ring very, very hollow amongst our rural community. The Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs in Northern Ireland has done a deep dive into the figures, which clearly outlines the significant and disproportionate impact these changes will have on Northern Ireland's agriculture sector. DAERA's analysis has shown that the vast majority of farms will be affected by these changes. In fact, under the current land valuations of 21,000 per acre in Northern Ireland, approximately 40% to 45% of cattle and sheep farms will be impacted, and an astounding 87% of dairy farms will be caught by this tax. This is not a marginal impact. It will affect almost half of the farms in Northern Ireland, which together account for 80% of the total agricultural land, 70% of beef cattle, 90% of the dairy cows, and 80% of all cattle. The proposed changes will disrupt the very heart of our agricultural output. This situation, sadly, is replicated across the whole of the UK. However, despite all of the evidence and the concerns of the UK government continues to state that only 500 farmers will be impacted by these changes. The official figures from the Office of Budgetary Responsibility remain highly uncertain. In fact, the OBR itself acknowledged that these estimates are among the most uncertain in the entire budget package. According to independent analysis, the true number of affected farmers is likely to be 5 times greater than the government's estimate. I've made this point repeatedly in this place and to this House. No farmers, no food. Thank you.
Jim Shannon.
Mr. Chairman, can I just ask a bit of point of clarification, if you don't mind? I'm just asking. I understand that the front benches will be on at 15:28. Does that mean that the Honourable Lady and myself can divide some 10 minutes each, approximately? Just asking the question. It's a question.
Don't be silly.
No, I'm just asking the question.
Sorry, I didn't catch that, sir.
I understand that the front bench comes on at 15:28, 17 minutes away. Does that mean that the Honourable Lady and myself can divide the 17 minutes between ourselves? Just asking. Just asking.
On the time we've set, we would be finishing, if people took the 4 minutes, at 15:19. One of the problems, and I'm not sure, is some people have put in to speak and aren't standing, which made the calculation difficult, because I assume people who put in to speak would be bobbing, and they've not bobbed. So at the moment, I will go with the 4 minutes we have agreed.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, okay, thank you very much. Thank you for that clarification. Not putting under any pressure, Mr. Chairman, but just to wish you well and the chairship that you have. Can I also thank the Honourable Lady for Cofidian? I think that's the way of doing it. I hope it's right with my Ulster Scots accent, and I hope that the pronunciation is good. But this debate is an important debate. It's a matter of grave concern for many constituents and communities across the United Kingdom, and those that I proudly represent as the Member of Parliament for Strangford. I declare an interest as a member of the Ulster Farmers Union, farmer and the landowner, and all my neighbours, every one of my neighbours, are concerned about this, and they've expressed that to me very, very clearly. Farmers are the backbone of our rural economy. Their work provides not only the food that graces our tables, but also the stewardship of our natural landscapes, which are an integral part of the cultural and environmental heritage. Yet these changes to APR certainly destabilise that very foundation. So I've spoken with farmers in the constituency and beyond. Message is clear. Changes to APR will place a substantial financial burden on farming families, forcing many to sell land to cover tax liabilities. According to the survey by the Country Land and Business Association, 86% of farmers indicated they would need to sell all or part of their land if APR was approved. In Northern Ireland, approximately 70% of farms, I understand, that's coming from the Ulster Farmers Union legal officer, that will be affected by it because the farmers are smaller. And really, my request, I'll make it at the very end, but just to say this, it's really important we get this right. Farmers have faced unrelenting challenges in recent years, soaring energy and fertiliser costs, unpredictable weather patterns, inflationary pressures. The last decade has been marked by uncertainty. So the loss of APR would mean that future generations could face unsurmountable inheritance tax. For smaller farms, especially, this could spell the end of their very viability. But the reality is that these changes will sweep up many genuine, hard-working family farms in their net. This is not just a financial issue, it's a matter of fairness, of community sustainability and food security. The Minister is an honourable person, but let's be honest and reason it. What's right and what's wrong? Justice is what we're looking at here, and it must be addressed. At a time when global supply chains are increasingly fragile, it is unwise to undermine domestic food production. Every acre lost to inheritance tax obligations reduces our ability to feed our population sustainably and affordably. I'm quite happy to, yeah.
I'd like to thank the honourable member for giving way. I mean, clearly, many members across the Chamber today are incredibly concerned by the government's proposals to cut agricultural property relief and business property relief. And it's certainly the case in my constituency of Mid-Sussex that my farmers came and saw me, and they are incredibly worried. In an area with high land values but relatively small farms, they think they're going to lose their farms. But as well as the global impact, does the honourable member agree with me that the impact on losing these farms will also be incredibly detrimental to the rural economy, to veterinary practices and agricultural merchants and other associated businesses attached to farming?
Can I thank the committee for that intervention? Very wise words, exactly right on the top of the nail. Minister, when you look around this chamber today, you'll see everybody's here, those who've spoken, those who are here. Every one of us is united in against the APR. Now, we're not going to put the Minister under any pressure on Julie, but if I was in a fight where there was 27 to 1, if there was 27 to 1, I would think twice about taking us all on. I'm very happy to, yeah.
Thank you very much. The honourable member will be aware that my wife's family come from Northern Ireland. Oh, yeah. My understanding is that the price of land is quite a lot higher per acre than it would be in Scotland or England. Does that not have a disproportionate effect on what we're talking about today in the province of Northern Ireland?
It certainly does, and Minister, lay down the line what we're after. The threshold at 1 million is wrong. It doesn't adequately reflect the rateable value of a farm. But if the rateable value was £5 million, then that would save the small farms. Now, we always want, the honourable lady who introduced it from Carfithian said about solutions. So my solution to the Labour Party, and I don't care if the Labour Party claims it, doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is that the threshold rises from 1 million to 5 million. If it does, family farms are saved. And if they're saved, then we've got a chance of moving forward. Minister, positivity, trying to put that forward as a solution. And I know that when we had a meeting with, the Minister with the Ulster Farmers Union, Representative Willie Irvine and Alex Kinnear a way back before Christmas, and we put forward that solution to him, and the Minister said he would take that to the Chancellor, because ultimately it's the Chancellor's solution and decision to do that. But it really is a clear way forward. And the honourable gentleman is right when he refers to Northern Ireland. Land values are more expensive in Northern Ireland than they are anywhere else. Therefore, that's why the 70% figure for Northern Ireland is greater than anywhere else. But we want to have the same medium for everybody across this great United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. There's also other ideas about mechanisms such as the extended payment windows or graduated tax liabilities, all to alleviate the financial strain on small farms. So I urge the Minister to provide clarity, reassurance to farmers who are deeply concerned about the future. And again, I say this, Minister, if we want to really do something positive from this debate today, and I think we can and must do that, then the very issue of the threshold is the way forward. When you add up the value of the land, you add up the value of the machinery, you add up the value of the stock, quite clearly you're well over that £1 million threshold. But if you made it 5 million, Minister, and it's not a figure graphed out of the air, it's a figure that the Ulster Farmers Union and the National Farmers Union have put forward as a figure that could address the issue. So today, Minister, I'm not going to put a lot of pressure on you. Well, actually, I am. I think we're all putting pressure on you, no matter what. The fact is, we see a way forward genuinely, constructively and positively. And I would beseech you, Minister, to take that message from this debate today, increase the threshold, save the family farms, and across all of Northern Ireland, where the Honourable Lady for Upper Bann and I represent, and all my neighbours who are worried, sick about what the future holds, those tenant farmers in Wales and Scotland and all across this great United Kingdom, we need the threshold raised. Do that, Minister, and you've got us on your side.
Rachel Gilmore.
Thank you, Chairmanship, Mr Stringer. First and foremost, I want to congratulate the Honourable Member for Caerphilly for securing this debate of vital importance. Honourable and Right Honourable Members will perhaps be sick of hearing me on this topic, but I feel compelled to provide a voice for my farmers. My constituency of Tiverton and Minehead is a similar make-up to the Honourable Ladies, overwhelmingly rural agricultural land and home to many farming communities, some 1,600 holdings according to the CLA. 432 of those farms will be hit by the government's APR changes. On this benches, as Liberals, we applaud our farmers, and as a former director of the National Farmers Union, I feel well placed to highlight the damaging consequences that will inevitably be visited upon them as a result of the changes to agricultural property relief. The government claims that 27% of all farms will be affected. If I am to be generous, this is misinformed. According to the in-depth analysis conducted by the National Farmers Union in collaboration with the OBR and Treasury experts, 75% of the nation's actual working farms fall above the £1 million threshold and will be struck by these punitive changes. These changes are said to be caveated by various different assumptions on rate relief that would take the inheritance tax exemptions which go into the flawed Treasury equation on this policy. The misapplied exceptions is that the first one is that the average family farm would not top the threshold of £3 million in value. This is just not the case. Great Ash Farm in my constituency is a typical good-sized family farm consisting of 256 acres and is on the market for £3.5 million. In an inheritance tax valuation, the farm's livestock and machinery will be added to this value, bringing the total to around £3.68 million. Even when the acreage is not as large, the value of agricultural land alone often pushes farmers close to, if not over, the £3 million threshold, and can certainly shatter the individual threshold of £1 million. Add to the value of the land the livestock, dead stock, properties, machinery and business, and the owners of a farm are looking at a hefty valuation, not one that they can capitalise on and still keep the farm, but one which will ensure that they are caught in the clause of this onerous death duty. The second misapplied exception is that farm ownership is not, in all cases, split equally between a husband and wife, and it doesn't always pass to a direct descendant. Existing capital gains tax rules have discouraged many older farmers from transferring their farms to their children, owing to the potential tax burden, which means that ownership is staggered across many generations in some cases, and often when there are not ownership models which meet the co-owning married couple status, as the Chancellor uses for the modelling of those exceptions. This means that the various personal and dependent inheritance tax exemptions which go into the flawed Treasury equation on this policy cannot be used on many occasions. The third misapplied exemption, the residence nil rate band, is unlikely to be applicable. It is reduced by £1 for every £2 when the estate exceeds £2 million. Therefore, if a farm business exceeds £2.65 million, residence nil rate tax band is no longer valid. This is yet another misapplied Treasury exemption which will not have a realistic effect on family farms' ability to keep the tax man from taking everything they have. In conclusion, I will make no apology at all for standing for my rural communities.
Time is up. Alistair Carmichael.
Thank you very much, Mr Stringer. I was one of those who had put in to speak. When I saw the attendance in the chamber, I thought I would exercise a self-denying ordinance. However, it seems to have been counterproductive, so I do just want to have a couple of minutes to drill down in particular into some of the underlying assumptions in relation to this. let's bear in mind that there are three ways in which agricultural land can be passed on in succession. It can be relieved under agricultural property relief, or under business property relief, or under a combination of the two. And hitherto, that has been that has offered executive practitioners and others a whole range of different options. And frankly, as long as the land qualified as agricultural land, farming land, then it didn't really matter which route was taken. And in fact, the value was pretty academic because it has 100% relief in any event. And I suspect that is why the HMRC guidance in relation to business property relief says that, in fact, for a relief claimed under BPR, the book value, if I can use that shorthand, should be used. There's no need, in fact, then to have the full market value. So the letter that the Chancellor of the Exchequer sent to the Treasury Select Committee on the 15th of November last year made no reference to those estates that passed on land under BPR only. So it seems to my mind almost certainly going to be the case that there is a large number of other farms that will be caught by this that have not hitherto been included in Treasury calculations. That is a view which is reinforced today by the publication of the report by the Agricultural Horticulture Development Board, which is, as the Honourable Member for Bridlington said, a non-departmental public body of DEFRA. They are levy funded, but as they say in their press release today, it's not for them to say whether or not inheritance lands should be exigible in these circumstances or not. They just wish to inform the debate with their analysis. And their analysis is that 42,204 farms out of 54,938 of 50 hectares or more will be affected. Now, this must surely give the Treasury some cause for concern, some basis on which they could pause this. We have got a long time still to go. This is not going to be in the finance bill until October, November of this year, if that's going to be the case. Where that element of doubt exists, then surely it would be sensible for everyone concerned if they were to engage in a meaningful dialogue with the farming unions and others.
John Glenn.
Grateful to the right honourable gentleman who's making an extremely fair assessment. And does he not acknowledge that the Treasury is full of very capable civil servants and ministers who would have a number of other options available to them? No doubt the argument will be that there is a black hole to be filled. Even if one doesn't accept that, there still are better options for the overall agricultural and rural communities that exist serving us across this country.
Alistair Carmichael.
There are other options. I'd look on another day with more time available. We might actually look at what the tax take is going to be for this. As the Secretary of State, when he gave evidence to the Select Committee, said this isn't going to be a problem because most people will avoid it. And in fact, there are going to be opportunities for that to be the case. But the underlying concern here, which I think the Minister has the opportunity to address today, is whether or not the government still adheres to the belief that there is a public policy interest in ensuring the transition of family farms down the generation. Because if that was the original basis in which these reliefs were introduced, if that remains the policy objective to this day, then I think the figures do need to be looked at more carefully. The thresholds could be increased, there could be a 10-year clawback, or whatever the solution is going to be. The industry is full of ideas on this, and there are any number of people who will come forward with suggestions which at least some people in government say they sought to achieve by making this change. So if the Prime Minister was not very clear on this, well, he was clear he wasn't that bothered about it, but if the object is to avoid the super-rich using land to shelter their wealth, then there are better ways of doing this. He will get full cooperation from the farming unions and farming communities. But in order to have that, there has to be a dialogue. And at the moment, we're getting nothing out of Treasury. If the Minister takes no other message back to the Treasury today, he should take this. The Chancellor must meet the farming unions.
We've got back on schedule, so it's 10 minutes for the front bench speakers. David Chadwick on behalf of the Lib Dems.
Thank you, Chair. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I'd like to thank the honourable member for Caerphilly for securing this important debate, and to applaud the work she is doing cross-party to ensure Welsh farmers have a strong voice in this place. We also heard contributions from the member for Tiverton and Minehead, who pointed out the holes in this proposed change to policy. And I welcome the contribution from the honourable member for the Shetland and Orkney Islands, whose voice I know is so valued by the agricultural community across these isles. He pointed out that there's still plenty of time for the government to engage properly with the sector, and it's in the public interest to preserve these farms. Last weekend, a group of farmers came to see me in Llandrindod, Wales, to show me their accounts. What they wanted to show me wasn't how much money they're making, but how little they are making. And their statistics were corroborated by figures released this month by the Welsh Government, showing that farming incomes have fallen by a staggering 34% across Wales in the last year, with an average income now sitting at just £22,000. These figures are perhaps not surprising when you look at what farmers have had to cope with recently. Rising energy costs, runaway fertiliser inflation, supermarkets forcing unfair prices on producers, the transition away from the EU customs union, disastrous Conservative trade deals with Australia and New Zealand, extra regulations from the Welsh Government. Those are just a few of the issues that they're coping with. Now add on to this the rise in national insurance and changes to APR and BPR announced in the autumn budget. Family farms are on the brink. Now the people working on our farms in Wales deserve a decent living. Farming is already a tough business, but these figures and challenges highlight how unsustainable the situation is for many families. The government's proposed changes to agricultural property relief make things worse by forcing farmers to either sell parts of their land or make repayments that will wipe out any annual profit they make. The government is relying on outdated APR claim figures from 21 to 22 and including non-commercial holdings in their calculations, downplaying the policy's impact. And according to NFU Cymru, closer to 75% of farms in Wales will be affected, not the 27% claimed by this government. And if they are so confident in their numbers, why won't they release a full impact assessment, including national breakdowns for Wales and Scotland? And when speaking to people in the sector, it is clear that they know what the impact will be: a further contraction in the rural economy. More young people will be forced to leave farming, placing our food security at risk, driving up food prices and damaging the wider rural economy. The process of rural depopulation will continue, making it harder for local councils to provide services. And in Wales, this policy could have a calamitous impact on the Welsh language. Recently, a 9-year-old pupil at Llanelwedd Primary School asked me on a school visit about the rising cost of fertiliser. I asked him if he was going to continue farming when he grew up. And he looked me in the eye and he said, "I am a farmer already." Yet under these new policies, this young man may inherit a smaller farm with little profit and fewer opportunities. Farming is not a typical business, but it is an essential one. In Wales, we've already seen the decline of many industries due to political decisions. And I fear the proposed changes to APR could have the same devastating effect on farming. Who will farm the Welsh countryside? Will it be Welsh farming families who have worked the land for generations, or will it be the super rich? It's reported that the government plans to soften the blow for non-DOMs, but they seem unwilling to listen to the farmers who are the backbone of our rural economy. Our farmers are patriots, servants of the land. Who will feed us when they are gone? Surely, now, government ministers must look again at this policy. It's not just opposition parties and farming unions criticising the policy, but also the Office for Budget Responsibility, supermarkets, and even, as of this weekend, the Welsh Labour First Minister. Rural Labour MPs need to stand with them and pressure the government to reconsider. And I applaud the member for Montgomeryshire and Glyndŵr for doing exactly that today. because there are alternatives. Many in my constituency are already asking, why is Labour targeting family farms, small businesses and charities for tax rises, while letting big banks, oil companies and tech giants off the hook? That's where the full troughs lie. APR isn't a loophole. Purposefully, as has already been mentioned today, it was introduced to protect family farms and safeguard our food security. If the government wants to stop tax evasion, it must work with the farming sector to find a solution that doesn't punish struggling farmers, because Welsh farmland belongs in Welsh farming hands.
Robbie Moore, on behalf of the official opposition.
Thank you, Mr Stringer, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And can I thank the honourable member for Claradyffin for securing this incredibly important debate, because here we are, yet again, summoning yet another minister to the House. We are slowly, Mr Stringer, working our way through all of DEFRA ministers, and here we are at the Treasury. And can I welcome the new Treasury Minister to his place, but replacing the Farming Minister, who seems to have disappeared from all of these debates. And can I say that I hope that the new Treasury Minister lasts longer in his post than the infamous Ed Stone, which I know that he was so proud to be the mastermind behind. But let us realise why we are here. This weekend we saw one of the biggest agricultural rallies in all parts of the United Kingdom on the back of the NFU's Farming Day of Unity in all four corners of the United Kingdom, with people from all walks of life coming together to support our farmers. And this follows protests outside supermarkets, outside Westminster, at auction marts, and yet we still have the government refusing to get behind our farming community and listen. Let this government be under no illusion. The strength of feeling outside of this place is quite rightly strong, and this issue will not go away. Mr Stringer, I thought when the government announced this policy that they were being just naive. Then I perhaps thought that they were being arrogant. But actually, the real conclusion is this is a vindictive policy that has been aimed at our farming community, and that is the only conclusion that I can come to, because yet still the government is unwilling to listen to the many stakeholders, whether it be the NFU, the CLA, the Farmers Association, and indeed many others, to listen to the concerns that they and all members in this House have raised so far. The Chancellor is yet to engage with any of them. And while the government no doubt will claim that this will only affect 27% of farms, research conducted by those very industry experts concludes that at least 75% of commercial family farms will be impacted, as the threshold introduced at £1 million is just going to impact the many. This disconnect stems from significant flaws in the government's methodology, which fails to account for the many market conditions and the many economic realities that many of our farming businesses will face. Because when you consider the value of a farming holding, it will, without doubt, when the average size of a farm is about 200 acres, be well in excess of the £1 million. Because when you take into account the value of the farm land, the value of a farm house, potentially a cottage or two, the value of any stocks or machinery or crops or growing crops that may be in store, it will exceed the £1 million cap, therefore impacting those businesses. And then when you take into account the value of the profitability that farming business may be making on an average size income of 200 acres, or indeed struggling to make any profit in itself, they're going to struggle to pay that bill. So what do? What are the options available to them? Well, they only have the option either to sell assets to pay that inheritance tax bill, or sell potentially some of the machinery, stocks, crops or livestock that may be in store, all impacting the productivity of that very farming unit. Or they may want to take out a loan, which has been an option that has been suggested by the government. But yet, I don't know if the Treasury Minister has spoken to any of the banks, because I have, and not one of them is saying that they will even lend a loan on the basis to pay a tax bill, because the gearing of many of our family farming businesses is so highly strung that they cannot pay any additional loan that may be granted to them because of the serviceability of that debt that probably exists alongside the family farming business that they already occupy is so strongly geared. And this is before, Mr Stringer, we take into account all of the other the budgetary consequences that this government has brought out. Increase employers' national insurance, increase in the minimum wage, the immediate effect of delinking payments, capital grants has been now removed, fertiliser tax is no doubt going to be introduced, the double cab pickup tax, all impacting the profitability and the productivity of our many family farming businesses. We also see a significant reduction in the land. We will also see a significant amount of reduction in the land that is available to rent. Around two-thirds of working farms rent some or all of their land, and that no doubt this policy will result in the amount of land being available to rent. And this is before, Mr Stringer, we take into account the human cost, because farming can be a very lonely business. And when added, the added weight of the changes, not only to agricultural property relief, but business property relief, I fear some of those older generations, and indeed those that are seriously ill at the moment, will be having to make decisions right now. Indeed, I have spoken to a few. I spoke to one farmer just last week who is aged 78, who is in ill health, who, if he passes away before April 26, any death tax will be zero. If he passes away after April 26, the death tax that is going to be exposed on his family is over £1 million. What decisions is that individual having to make right now? And these are the consequences of the decisions and the choices that this government has had to bring in. Therefore, will the government have the moral courage to pause the actions and consult with those industry experts, all of the members on this side of the House that continue to raise their concerns on behalf of their constituents? Will the government record, as the Shadow Secretary of State has quite rightly asked every time at the dispatch box, will they record farm suicides in the next few months so we can properly assess the impact, the human impact, that the choices that this Labour government are bringing in? And what measures could be put in place to mitigate the impact of these changes on those who are already over retirement age or those who are in serious ill health, who have held on to those assets for many, many years, many, many generations, that want to simply be in a position of handing down that asset to the next generation? So I want to ask the Minister a few questions. Why on earth has no economic impact assessment been undertaken, not only of the consequences of the changes to agricultural property relief, and agricultural property relief dual claimed with business property relief, but not solely business property relief? Has any impact assessment been taken into account, not only to do with the changes with inheritance tax, but the wider changes, budgetary changes, through the measures that I've already alluded to? Why do the government believe it is unnecessary to take into account the size of a family farm when they're indicating the negative consequences this proposal will make? If you implement a threshold of £1 million, the size of a farm absolutely matters, Mr Stringer, because that takes into account not only the amount of land that is being farmed, but the existing productivity and the assets that are retained within that business. So why are the size of the farms not being taken into account? And if the government is so determined to push ahead, why on earth has the government arrived at a £1 million threshold as the appropriate figure? How do the government deal with the disappearance of the residence nil rate band progressively on estates valued at more than £2 million? And how will the government protect tenanted land on estates that will be valued at levels much higher than any threshold? What hope is there, Mr Stringer, for the tenant farmer who is told by their landlord that because because the landlord is now having to make decisions to liquidise the capital value tied up in the land that they rent in order to satisfy this government's potential tax liability, as a result, the tenant farmer will have no tenancy because the tenancy will have to come to an end? But that will mean for that tenant farmer they will lose their home, their business, their livelihood. There is no amount of tax planning, Mr Stringer, that will help those tenant farmers and those individuals find a way forward. Now, the Chancellor of the Exchequer claimed in setting out the £1 million threshold that she wanted to protect hard-working family farmers. Well, I can tell you, Mr Stringer, and indeed the Minister, that all family farmers are hard-working farmers. So why on earth was the threshold set at that level? And I can say on behalf of the tenant farming sector, whatever level is set, it does nothing to protect our tenant farmers, because they will be impacted as a result of the collateral damage through the decisions that their landlord will be having to make. And just this week, Mr. Stringer, the noble lord for Richborough has received a written parliamentary question in the other place, stating that agricultural property relief and business property relief on assets that are tied up in private pension funds will not receive any of the reliefs that the ministers are citing. So, as the Pensions Minister, can the honourable member confirm this, explain why the government has further excluded these farms that are held under these types of ownerships out of this calculation? Because from the other place, from the response that we've received from the government, they will absolutely be impacted. So, Mr. Stringer, there is absolutely much more to do. The Conservatives, as we've indicated, will reverse this disastrous family farm tax, which will impact hard-working family farms. Our position is clear on this side of the House. This policy is bad for farming businesses. It's bad for rural economic growth. It's bad for food prices. It's bad for food security. And farmers can see it. We can see it. The NFU can see it. The CLA can see it. The Tenant Farmers Association can see it. The CAAV can see it, to which, Mr. Stringer, I must declare that I am a fellow. And they can all see it. The supermarkets can see it. We can see it. Indeed, indeed a lonely Labour MP sitting on the other side can see it. So why on earth can the government not see it?
Minister, we've got a generous amount of time left. Can you try and ensure that there's 2 minutes at least for the wind-up? Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Stringer. It's a pleasure to speak in this debate with you in the chair, and I congratulate the member for Caerphilly for securing this debate and for engaging in many different pronunciations of her constituency over the course of the last hour and a half. She rightly makes a powerful case for Welsh farming that all of us in South Wales would like to reinforce. Now, we will not all agree on the policy under discussion today, but we all agree that topics like this are important to many and should be properly discussed in this place, even if ideally at a lower temperature in this room. Now, I've listened closely to the contributions in this debate, and I thank all honourable members for setting out their view, for speaking on behalf of not only their constituents, but also acquaintances, friends, or indeed family members. The member for Caithness, Sutherland and Easter Ross made a clear case about the emotional, not just economic importance of land to farmers and farming family. And almost all of us will have someone close to us who farms, and even those who do not will recognise the huge contribution that our farmers make to our food security, to our economy and to our rural communities. None of us take those contributions for granted, and we've heard that across this hall today. Before I turn to the specific points honourable members have raised, let me briefly, and I promise briefly, set out the context for the budget decisions we are debating today. The context, this government's inheritance matters, however much the member for Keighley and Ilkley declines to mention it. Unsustainable public finances, equally unsustainably struggling public services, councils going bust, prisons overflowing. Tough decisions were unavoidable at the budget if we are to restore economic stability, fix the public finances and support public service. This is the backdrop to the decision to reform agricultural property relief. It was not a decision taken lightly, but is a necessary decision, not least because rural communities lose out more than most when health, transport and council services across the UK are not living up to the standards I think any of us expect. And it's the right decision because the government will maintain very significant levels of inheritance tax relief for agricultural property, far beyond what is available to most assets, because we recognise the role those reliefs play in supporting farms. Now, this debate is really about how we balance these objectives of protecting family farms with the public finances and public services. And the status quo, the full unlimited exemption introduced in 1992, has become unsustainable. The benefits have become far too heavily skewed towards the wealthiest estates. 40% of agricultural property relief benefits the top 7% of estates making claims. The top 2% claim 22% of the relief. That means 37 estates claiming £119 million in a single Of course.
John Glenn.
I'm extremely grateful to the honourable gentleman, and with all due respect, he is a serious economist with a serious track record in analysing public finances. But surely he has to accept that given the significant uncertainty that numerous organisations that represent farming interest outside of the party political debate have cast serious questions about the deliverability and the amount of money that will be raised, that there is surely time for people like him to work with officials to find better ways of finding the sums he says he needs, and I'm not even disputing that in this intervention, to do the right thing by the farming communities of this country and not do the unintended damage that clearly is going to take effect.
Minister.
I thank him for his kind words, even though I can't agree with everything that he then followed with. I'll come on to some of the points he has raised shortly, but all I would say is, because I think this is going to come up several times during the course of what remains of this debate, we can't use farm valuation data to make claims about inheritance tax claims, and on the latter we do have the actual data for the claims actually made, and that is what we are relying on. Now, we see a similar... I'll make some progress, then I'll give way. We see a similar picture for business property relief. It is in large part these reliefs that mean the largest estates pay materially lower rates of inheritance tax than more modest estates. This undermines faith in the fairness of our tax system more generally. And given the pressures we face, it cannot be right to leave this system unreformed, a point the Honourable Member for Waveney Valley made well. So, that is the context and the rationale for the changes to how we target agricultural property relief and business property relief from April 2026. Contrary to the claims, and I'm afraid repeated by the Honourable Member for Strangford just now, that these reliefs are being scrapped, we will continue to provide significant tax relief, including for small farms and businesses. Individuals will still benefit from 100% relief for the first 1 million of combined business and agricultural assets, and importantly, the relief sits on top of all the other spousal exemption and nil rate bans. Depending on people's circumstances, up to 3 million can be passed on by a couple to their children or grandchildren free of inheritance tax. But beyond this, of course.
Jim Shannon.
Really short if I can. On the rateable value that you mentioned earlier on, my understanding with talking to the legal person of the Ulster Farmers Union, the rateable value is one based upon where the farm was handed over in the 70s, handed over in the 80s, handed over in the 90s, or even the 90s. But it's not the rateable value that shows the real value of the land today. Therefore, it's a flawed system. And if it's a flawed system, Minister, then you need to go back to the very beginning and look at that. I say that respectively. I'm not trying to catch anybody out. I'm just saying, if it's not right, then get it right.
Minister.
The point I was making was about his point that the relief had been scrapped, and I was just making the point that the reliefs have certainly not been scrapped and that they remain very generous indeed. And beyond these thresholds, 50% relief will continue, a reduced marginal inheritance tax rate of 20% rather than the standard 40%. And reflecting on the points raised by several members today about the cash flow challenges some farms face, particularly after bad years like last year, heirs can spread the payments over 10 years interest-free, a benefit that is not seen anywhere else in the inheritance tax system.
Alistair Carmichael.
I mean, if you're looking at a £400,000 bill, which is what you would be paying in a £3 million farm, if you're earning £25,000 a year, you're still going to struggle to make that payment in the 10 years. In fact, it would be downright impossible. That's how the land gets sold.
Minister.
I'm not going to comment on the individual example he's giving, but generally he's right to say, in general, he's right to say that there can be large variation in the profits of farms between years and between farms. That's partly why the tax system already uniquely for farmers allows us to average profits over periods of time. But all farmers that think they'll be affected with this, obviously our advice is that they should seek advice in turn. Now, all estates making claims for these relief... Now, Mr Stringer, I'll turn to the impact these reforms will have, as that's been the central focus of most comments today. I'll make some progress. In 2026-27, up to 520 estates claiming in agricultural property relief, including those that also claim business property relief, are expected to pay more as a result of this change. This means that around 3/4 of estates claiming agricultural property relief will not pay any more. But the members for Keighley and Ilkley and the member for Orkney and Shetland raised questions about business property relief specifically, claims that are not covered by agricultural property relief. And I can tell him that around 3/4 of estates claiming business property relief alone, i.e. the same proportion as with agricultural property relief, once we exclude those only holding AIM shares, often held for the purpose of avoiding inheritance tax, will not pay any more inheritance tax in 26-27. And all estates making claims for those reliefs will continue to receive generous support at a total cost of £1.1 billion to the Exchequer. This system will remain more generous than it was before 1992, when the inheritance tax was applied at a maximum rate of 50%, including to the first 1 million passed on. Several speakers today have implied this change will end the passing down of farms between generations. I would just gently point out in response that farmers, agricultural landowners and small business owners did not receive 100% on inheritance tax for almost all of the 20th century, and yet farms and businesses very much were passed down between generations. Indeed, the tax system will continue to support this. As the Institute of Fiscal Studies have said, our reforms will still leave land much more lightly taxed than most other assets. These changes should also be seen in the wider context of support for farmers and rural communities. The member for Aberdeenshire North and Moray East was wrong in his comments on the Office for Budget Responsibility, where the document produced this week provides no new information, but he was right about the importance of food security, as was the honourable member from Great Yarmouth. That is why the budget committed £5 billion to farming over the next 2 years, including the biggest budget for sustainable food production in our history. It also committed £60 million to help farmers affected by the unprecedented wet weather last winter. The wider tax system will also continue to support farming, including tenants as well as owners. That includes exemptions from business rates, the use of rebated diesel and the ability, as I said, to average tax affairs over a number of years. Mr Stringer, as we've heard today, the reforms to inheritance tax generate strong views, and I understand that. I recognise that a small number of estates will have to pay more. I have not hidden from that fact today, nor in conversations...
Can the Minister just confirm when he and the Government will indeed start listening to everybody outside this place, all different stakeholders, all different banks, accountants, supermarkets, to the points that they are making? Because the Minister, dare I say, is in a lone position on this point, as is the Government. And secondly, because he didn't allow my intervention earlier, can you just confirm why the Government is not taking into account the value and indeed the size of agricultural units when projecting the impact of the changes that will have on family farming businesses, or indeed farming businesses?
Minister.
The honourable member raises the question of supermarkets, and supermarkets can talk, but there's a lot they could do directly to support our farmers. On your second... I listened to your question.
Order.
I listened to your question. I'll make some more progress, because I haven't hidden from what I've heard from individuals across the country about this issue in recent months, from talking to farmers in Mid Wales and East Anglia. But reform of these reliefs is necessary if we are serious about putting our public finances on a stable footing and repairing our broken public services, including the schools, the hospitals and the roads that communities across the UK, including in rural areas, that they rely on every single day. We have taken these decisions to make the system fairer and more sustainable. These decisions come alongside significant new investments in farming and support for small business. Thank you, Mr Stringer, and all those who've spoken today, in particular the member for Caerphilly, for securing this day of it, and I look forward to hearing her concluding remarks.
Davis.
Firstly, I just want to thank all honourable friends for their contribution today. I appreciate your words, your interventions and your speeches, and this is so important for food security. But for us in Wales, it's also, as has been mentioned, the Welsh language and our culture. And as I mentioned in my speech, there are alternatives which could bring further taxation into the Treasury, but more importantly, secure our food-producing farms for future generations. I have to be honest, I'm really disappointed with the response we've had from the Government and the Treasury today. It's not what I was hoping to hear. The issue affects my constituency of Caerphilly. I'll say it again so you can all tune in. Caerphilly. But thank you, all of you, for trying. Where 60% of our residents live rurally. It affects all rural constituencies of all political colours. We are here to represent our constituents. And may I ask kindly if we can do that with integrity, with purpose and fairness. We need to have a Welsh impact assessment on the effect of this APR and BPR, and I call again on the government to do that.
The question is that this House has considered the impact of changes to agricultural property relief. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. Thank you. Thank you.